Welcome into 5 Wide Fantasy. Today's video, must start and sit running backs for week 12 of the fantasy football season. Recording this here and getting it out to you guys on Thursday. So we are including everyone on the Thanksgiving slate, getting you the top 30 running backs on the week. This is a major week. We're getting into, of course, no teams on bye. So there's tons of backs potentially you need to play. And there's going to be tons of decisions for you to make as to whether or not you should start players, sit players. This should give you a good idea of how I feel about each and every guy this week. If you guys enjoyed the video, drop a like, subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed. And of course, go check out our friends over at Betfred. One of my favorite plays for the Thanksgiving slate is in Vikings-Patriots. I'm going to be same game parlaying the Patriots +3 and as well Jacoby Myers over 50.5 receiving yards. If you look at the Vikings team, they're very, very focused defensively on playing in a too-high shell with zone coverage. It's at the highest rate in the NFL. Jacoby Myers, almost 50% of his receptions on the season have come against zone coverage. His yards per out run is top 20 against zone coverage. I think Myers is going to be used extensively in this matchup in the middle of the field. The Vikings defense, because of that too-high shell, leaves the middle of the field open at the highest rate in the NFL. Myers is going to have a great opportunity to feast in this matchup. As well, for the Vikings, the Patriots are an elite pass defense, incredibly good, and have been great at generating pressure. Really, really good at generating pressure. And the Vikings pass pro has struggled immensely. The Cowboys had a 60% pressure rate against Kirk Cousins last week. The Patriots are top 4 in pressure rate on the season. I think they're going to be able to replicate that performance here and give Kirk Cousins a ton of problems. So give me the Patriots to cover and give me Jacoby Myers over 50.5 receiving yards. That, again, is going to be boosted over at Betfred. If you sign up at Betfred, deposit $50. Bet $50 on any market. They're going to give you $250 in free bets. So if you guys haven't taken advantage, go do that link. That link is down below in the description. Let's get to these rankings, starting with my top 6. SAQUON Barkley leads the way. And of course, what is probably considered to be a tough matchup, obviously the Cowboys are 6th in fantasy points allowed to the running back position, but they've ranked 27th in run defense grade and actually are 26th in rushing yards allowed per game. They've just been able to keep opponents out of the end zone. That's why they've been good. Barkley should see plenty of volume here. I don't see the Giants wanting to throw the ball very much in this matchup, so I expect to see Barkley see 25+ touches in this game. And even if they do want to throw the ball, the Cowboys will generate plenty of pressure, like I mentioned earlier, against Daniel Jones, and Jones should probably be forced to check the ball down, and Barkley should see plenty of volume there too. At 2, Austin Eckler going against the Arizona Cardinals, who are 21st in fantasy points allowed, 23rd in rushing DVOA. Eckler, I'm not sure about Mike Williams' status, very much up in the air. If he continues to be out again this week, Eckler could get back to seeing some higher receiving volume against this Cardinals defense. Derrick Henry in at 3 against the Bengals. The Bengals are backing up to be about a middle-of-the-road run defense, 15th in fantasy points, 23rd in run defense grade from PFF. Still a matchup where we're playing Henry. At 4, Travis Etienne. He's a player that you're going to find me higher on than pretty much any other fantasy analyst you'll probably find on YouTube or really anywhere. I think his volume as a back in this offense, and he's just a pinnacle piece of this offense and being able to move the ball. His role is way too good for me to pass up on being a top 5 back rest of season. As good as Baltimore is, 5th in fantasy points, 14th in rush DVOA. That doesn't concern me when it comes to Travis Etienne and his dynamic ability to break big plays and be involved as a receiver. At 6, Kenneth Walker going against the Raiders. The Raiders have really started to fall off, not just in the pass defense game, but also against the run. 26th in fantasy points, 22nd in rushing DVOA. At 6, Jonathan Taylor. Taylor is in a pretty decent matchup here against the Steelers. They're 7th in rushing DVOA. They have been pretty good in that department, but 19th in fantasy points. This is a game that will likely see a competitive game script, and Taylor we've seen see plenty of volume ever since the coaching change with Jeff Saturday and since he's finally gotten back healthy. Flipping the page to the rest of the top 12, Josh Jacobs in at 7. Jacobs going against Seattle. Seattle 23rd in fantasy points, 17th in rushing DVOA. Jacobs is a huge, huge piece of this offense. They're running the ball so often in neutral game scripts. I think this will be a neutral game script here against Seattle, a chance for them to win this game. I know Seattle's been very, very good this season, but very competitive in the majority of the games they played this year, and I think the Raiders have the chance to be competitive in this one. At 8, Dalvin Cook. I mentioned earlier how I think this is a matchup where I don't think the Vikings walk away victorious. The Vikings have a tough matchup here against the Patriots, who are second in fantasy points allowed, but a lot of that comes down to the fact they've allowed just one rushing TD on the season, and Cook is not a player that's been getting enough volume inside the red zone in this O'Connell offense. So I think he can just be just fine in this matchup and still has a chance to score here against New England, who I think is a bit overrated when it comes to their run defense. At 9, Christian McCaffrey. McCaffrey clearly outsnapping Elijah Mitchell. We're seeing him getting work in the receiving game, which is great. The concern is for me is I think I see him more as a back-end RB1 rest of season. This is a mediocre matchup. The Saints are 14th in fantasy points allowed, 20th in rushing DVOA. My problem here, though, is what do we do about the fact that Elijah Mitchell is siphoning these carries? Like, I think that puts a cap on his upside week to week. So I think this is where I'll kind of have him going forward, where he'll be a guy that can give me like 15 fantasy points a game. At 10, Nick Chubb going against Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay has been known for their ability to stifle fantasy running backs, 4th in fantasy points allowed, but 22nd in rushing DVOA. I think this is an opportunity here for Chubb that I think he'll see the ball quite a bit because this Tampa Bay pass defense looks very, very good when healthy. So I think Chubb has the ability to still produce for you this week against Tampa Bay. That might be an intimidating matchup. One player I'm very, very high on this week, James Conner, going against the LA Chargers. The Chargers' run defense has been brutal. We saw Isaiah Pacheco torch him for over 100 yards. Doesn't really matter who the back is. They're going to be able to move this offense or this defensive line of the Chargers, who are 30th in fantasy points allowed to running backs. At 12, the top 12 rounded out with Miles Sanders. Sanders going against the Packers. I've always said all season long the Packers are a bad run defense and one you want to play against. If you look at their numbers here, 27th in fantasy points allowed and 29th in rushing DVOA. All right, moving on to the top 24 here. At 13, Aaron Jones. Another matchup with the Eagles, who are trying and working to improve that run defense with the addition of Ndamukong Suh, but it's still a work in progress. They're 18th in fantasy points allowed and 26th in rushing DVOA. I think Jones plays a big part of this offense, especially with how good the Eagles secondary has been this season. We'll see him involved both as a pass catcher and potentially see some efficiency here against the Eagles run defense. At 14, Jeff Wilson. Yet another week for me where I'm a person that's had a lot of Jeff Wilson and Raheem Mostert shares this season, just by the way things have shaken out with the waiver wire and whatnot. And I'm probably going to play both of these guys. Houston, dead last in fantasy points allowed to running backs, one of the worst run defenses in the NFL. A very, very plus matchup here. Wilson is the leader of this backfield. It's not by a significant margin, but it's enough of a margin where I can see him being on the cusp of a top 12 back in a really good matchup. At 15, David Montgomery. I know the Jets going up against the Jets here are 9th in fantasy points allowed, top 5 run defense grade from PFF. This is a difficult matchup. Field status, whether he plays or not, definitely gives a positive impact to Montgomery because we'll see this team likely get back to that incredibly high rushing volume from their running backs as opposed to Fields mixing in 12 plus carries from the quarterback position. So regardless, I expect Montgomery's volume to increase, and we know that Khalil Herbert is out, so that makes things very appealing for Montgomery. At 16, Tony Pollard going against the Giants. The Giants, 24th in fantasy points allowed, 28th in rushing DVOA. A good matchup here for both of these backs. These guys are my 9.5 point favorites in this game. So I expect the Cowboys to be holding on to a healthy lead in this game. Pollard has just been the better back between him and Ezekiel Elliott. I see the touches being plentiful, but they're going to be split. I see maybe 16, 17 touches in this game, and he has a chance to be efficient with those carries as he has been a ton lately. At 17, Devin Singletary against the Detroit Lions. The Lions, 25th in fantasy points allowed, 27th in rushing DVOA. A good matchup here for Singletary, who hasn't seen a significant impact taken away from James Cook or Nyheim Hines. But obviously, if they get into a game script here where they're leading by a lot, we could see Singletary and his role diminish in that give way to James Cook. But early on, expect the volume to be there. Expect him. He's been the nice part has been is that neither James Cook or Nyheim Hines have taken a significant role of his receiving game. He's been running all of the routes. That gives you that nice lift to his floor week in and week out. At 18, waiting to hear him, Alvin Kamara going up against San Francisco, who are 1st in fantasy points allowed, 4th in run defense grade. Does this team make a change at the quarterback position? probably after a win. I don't think that's going to happen. But regardless, this is a very difficult matchup for Kamara. And honestly, right now, we just can't trust him in terms of his efficiency on the ground. Is he going to get enough volume as a receiver? Now adding Taysom Hill a bit more to the mix. They made a note to do that last week, and they want to make sure they're doing that more. So makes me a little bit skeptical from a top 12 perspective. At 19, Rachaad White going against the Browns. The Browns, one of the worst teams again against the run, 31st in fantasy points, 32nd in rushing DVOA. Rachaad White is now the starter in Tampa Bay, not a clear role that he is the number one guy. That's why I don't have him a little bit higher on my list. I think there'll still be a split and the potential of Leonard Fournette stealing work, those valuable carries inside the red zone. That's why I have Rachaad White here, but a fantastic start this week. One guy I'm worried about, Ramondre Stevenson. I know I like the Patriots in the matchup with the Vikings, but why I like it is their pass game. We're finally getting into an opportunity here for the offense for the Patriots where they're going to have the opportunity to play indoors. That could help the pass game, and it's going to be very tough to run against this Minnesota defense, who are second in run defense grade. They've been very good defending the run, but they're 20th in fantasy points allowed, not quite as good. And Stevenson, potentially, I see his floor being lifted by the receiving game. I mentioned it earlier, the too high look from the Vikings will lead to some underneath routes from Ramondre this week as well. At 21, Michael Carter. This is where those positive matchups start to come for Carter and why I said he was a great player to add and make a trade for a few weeks ago when we looked at the best matchups for running backs for the rest of the season. Michael Carter going against the Chicago Bears, who are 29th in fantasy points allowed, 31st in run defense grade. Carter has a pretty decent separation from James Robinson in the touches and snaps department here. Carter needs to start putting it together. This is a very, very important week if he wants to continue to have a hold on the lead work in opportunities. I think Carter will be able to maximize that opportunity here, and getting rid of Zach Wilson could be a major benefit. We saw Mike White and Michael Carter last season have a very, very explosive game up against the Bengals, I believe it was. We could see that here against the Chicago Bears as well. At 22, Latavius Murray. Murray in, of course, another positive matchup going against Carolina, 28th in fantasy points, 21st in rushing DVOA. Murray, obviously now with Melvin Gordon gone and Chase Edmonds out for an extended period, this is his backfield. He is going to be the workhorse in this offense. And the good thing here, we saw the volume, incredibly high volume last week, and now that should continue in another game script where potentially positive if they can take down one of the worst teams in the league in Carolina, but at the very least competitive. That's going to give those opportunities for Latavius Murray because this pass game has just not been working lately whatsoever. At 23, Ezekiel Elliott against the Giants. I mentioned the upside with Pollard in terms of this matchup, in terms of the game script. This is where I see Zeke as a back-end RB2 on the week, but with the potential, like last week, to score. I know I was down on both of these guys last week, and that was a major, major mistake. At 24, Raheem Mostert. I mentioned it. This matchup for Miami against the worst fantasy defense against running backs in the league definitely makes Mostert, even as the second guy, playable and very much one I want to look to this week over these next guys, which is Najee Harris to close out our top 30 at RB 25. I have him on the week. The Colts are 12th in fantasy points allowed, 8th in run defense grade. I really like the Colts defense. They're a very, very quality unit, and I think Harris, who's been able to finally pick it up the last couple of weeks with volume, with finally being productive, I think that could stop here and we could get back to some more of those frustrating weeks when it comes to Najee Harris. But Jalen Warren's status does elevate him to being a little bit better than I originally would have thought if Warren is healthy. At 26, Antonio Gibson going against the Falcons, 22nd in fantasy points allowed, 24th in rushing DVOA. Gibson, to me, now seems to have elevated himself over Brian Robinson. I think Gibson is the better play. He's proven to be better and more efficient. Robinson, of course, is still opportunities when it comes to the goal line and whatnot, but Gibson has been playing better, and that could lead to some more valuable touches for him. And he's earned them lately. He's been very good in his opportunity. At 27, Leonard Fournette. I still see Fournette as a playable asset this week against Cleveland because it's a very positive matchup. But again, What happens to this role coming off a bye? Is it even further? They want to make sure they get Rachaad White involved in this offense. That tends to happen with these rookies off a bye week, as their role tends to increase even further. So I'm a little bit skeptical there, but I don't think his role completely goes away. At 28, Jamal Williams against the Bills, who are 4th in rush DVOA, 13th in fantasy points allowed. This is a tough matchup for Jamal Williams, who I don't like as a player and has been very, very reliant on touchdowns. What was it? He had I think the stat was the most touchdowns, or the most touchdowns on the least amount of yards, I believe, the least amount of yards for a player to score 3 touchdowns in a game in the history of the NFL, I think was what the number was. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong. But like I said, this is a player who's inefficient on the ground and just vultures touchdowns, and I don't think he can do that here against the Bills. They'll need to be throwing the ball quite a bit, and that could lead to more swift looks as well. At 29, D'Onta Foreman. Foreman going against the Denver Broncos, who are 10th in fantasy points allowed, 18th in rushing DVOA. If I could say anything about their defense, I think they're a lot better against the pass than they are against the run. And Carolina going to Sam Darnold, they're a little bit skeptical of putting the ball in his hands in this game against Denver's elite pass defense. So I expect Foreman to be a player who doesn't have much upside, but can give you a decent floor this week in a really plus matchup. All right, rounding out the top 30, and then we'll get to the players that I have out of my top 30. Isaiah Pacheco going against the Rams. They're 8th in fantasy points and 1st in run defense grade. This is a really good defense from the Rams in terms of against the run, and Pacheco's role is all run game. He's not being involved as much as a receiver, but the thing is here, the Rams are a shell of themselves. They're like 15.5-point underdogs in this game. The Chiefs will take care of this team pretty easily, and now with Clyde Edwards-Helaire status up in the air for this game, I expect Pacheco to see some volume late in this game as they look to burn some clock. So his volume should be there to elevate him into my top 30 for the week. All right, some players that missed, some guys you're asking about. I'm still not so sure what's going to go on with the Baltimore Ravens, if Gus Edwards will be healthy. If he's not, I don't really want to be playing a guy like Kenyon Drake or Justice Hill. The two of them will just be splitting work, and I don't think it's valuable to me. I haven't liked what the Ravens have been doing offensively the last few weeks. Kyren Williams is just barely out of my top 30. He is 100% the player you want to have in the Rams offense. The cutting Darrell Henderson signifies Kyren Williams eventually to be the every down back to me in this offense. Yeah, Elijah Mitchell is also outside of my top 30. Again, I think this is a tough matchup for their run game, and Mitchell's the number 2 option in this offense. So I just don't see enough upside for me in this game. James Robinson, I think he's not a terrible play. Outside of my top 30 as well. Dameon Pierce is the big one, I should mention. I know the Texans are making a change at running back, but Texans making a change at quarterback, but that doesn't mean that this is going to be an opportunity for Dameon Pierce to see 25 carries. The Miami offense has been absolutely electric. They'll probably take care of Houston pretty quickly in this game, and Miami has an elite run defense. They're great at stopping the run, and Pierce has struggled in against these really good defenses. We saw it last week against Washington when I took his under in receiving yards or rushing yards as well. So I don't want to play Pierce this week wherever you can. Samaje Perine, I can't play him as you go through. Some of you might be in that bad of a spot where you just have injuries and you're down to nothing. He's RB 38 for me. Like, there's only the Titans are dead last in receiving receptions allowed per game to running backs, but this team's not going to run the ball efficiently, so I can't really see myself playing Perine. I don't see enough upside for me. So that is my top 30 on the week. If you guys have any questions, any players I didn't mention that you want to hear about, drop it down below in the comments. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like, subscribe to the channel, and check out our friends over at Betfred for Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving to all of you out there in the U.S. If you sign up at Betfred, deposit $50. They're going to give you $250 in free bets after you place a $50 wager. So go take care of that. Have some fun on Thanksgiving with a nice boosted parlay over at Betfred. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you next time.